So we all just saw Artur Beterbiev's very impressive 7th round TKO victory against Callum Smith. In this video, I'll be breaking down his very likely next bout against Dmitry Bivol, my thoughts on it, and a little preview for that fight. And also, I'm also going to give you guys a subtle prediction for it as well, because I'm not super confident in my prediction for that fight, but I'm going to tell you straight up who I am slightly favoring at this point. Now, quick little recap, really brief, of the Callum Smith fight. It was a really good fight, not fight of the year type of fight, but a really solid, enjoyable matchup. If somehow you didn't catch it, definitely find a way to watch it, because I truly do recommend it. It was a really enjoyable matchup, and I had a lot of fun watching it. When you look at the bout, Beterbiev came out swinging right away, which we don't really see too often. Usually takes him a good minute or two before he starts to really open up. But in this bout, within the first 2 to 3 seconds of them both being in the middle of the ring, he started to pressure right away, right off the bat, and he started to fight off pretty well. He won round 1. Round 2 was a good round for Callum. I gave it to Callum Smith. He landed some really clean shots. He showed some good work. He didn't dominate the round, but he did look sharp overall. Rounds 3 and 4 as well, both definitely went to Beterbiev. He just had the better work. He hurt Callum Smith in the 5th round, unloaded on him. Callum Smith did recover from it, but he had him hurt for sure. Round 6 was actually a bit tight. It was a relatively close round. I don't even think it would be too out of line to say that Callum won that round. I gave it to Beterbiev, but it was a close round. And then in round 7, Beterbiev just demolished Smith, dropped him twice, got the stoppage victory. Very impressive win. I had the fight scored 59-55 for Beterbiev prior to the stoppage. Now, this sets up an undisputed matchup against Dmitry Bivol. I can't see any fighter getting in the way of it anymore. I remember I wanted to see this fight really badly a year and a half I think it was like a year and a half ago or something in that range, and I remember that Joshua Buatsi was ranked number 1 for Dmitry Bivol, and I remember that for Artur Beterbiev, he had Anthony Yarde in the way of that matchup, and it was unfortunate because I knew that those guys would get in the way. Buatsi never ended up fighting Bivol. Instead, it ended up being Lyndon Arthur, but that happened a lot later. And when it came to Yarde, Beterbiev got him out of there, made a statement, dominated. But now that those guys have gotten rid of those mandatories, I can't really think of anyone necessarily getting in the way of this bout happening. And that's a really good thing at this point. 175 is not an open division at all. If any fighter such as Canelo or anyone in that range decided to move up to 175 and try to take over, it's not an open weight at all. Beterbiev and Bivol are the clear 2 heads of the weight class. There's no one in the weight that competes with them, no one in the weight class that is capable of beating them, in my opinion, at this point. And there's no one in this weight class that I want to see either of them fight except for each other. This is the only fight that can be made in the weight. It's for undisputed. It's for all the titles. Both fighters are on the pound-for-pound list, for me at least, easily. They're definitely both on my pound-for-pound list. I can't see either fighter not being on it. I have Bivol, I believe, at number 6, and I have Beterbiev somewhere in the bottom of that top 10. But both fighters are definitely on the pound-for-pound list. Both fighters are champions, undefeated. If this fight doesn't get made now, it's really has no true timetable to be made. Artur Beterbiev is already close to 40. He's already out of his physical prime. He looked tremendous, by the way, tonight. It was one of his best career performances, in my opinion. But he's out of his physical prime. Dmitry Bivol, he's not an old guy. He's getting a little older, but he's not an old guy. But if he waits any longer, it's really not going to be fair to Beterbiev. And I know that would be the smart move for Bivol, wait another year or so, and end up beating him, outboxing him, because he's just too old to really do much when it comes to getting a victory. But for the fans' sake, let's get this fight happening now. Let's make it happen. And I'm going to tell you right now, I have switched my prediction for this fight multiple times. I have always at one point been picking Beterbiev. Then at one point I was picking Bivol. Then back to Beterbiev. Then back to Bivol. The thing is, these guys, they're not super consistent in their performances. I know that sounds surprising, but there will be times where Dmitry Bivol will give us a flat performance like he did against Umar Salimov or his last time out against Lyndon Arthur. He won't always dominate. He won't always look super impressive. And Artur Beterbiev, I think, even more so. When you look at his fight against Adam Deans, after that fight, I was picking Bivol because I thought he looked really poor. The Anthony Yarde fight, I was not impressed by at all. But honestly, I thought he looked really good against Callum. And I think there's a really good shot he would defeat Dmitry Bivol. And I think what makes me favor Beterbiev now, after this point, is I always think about the fact that Canelo Alvarez chose to fight Bivol over Beterbiev. Now, I know stylistically that could have been a factor. They could have looked at styles make fights, and maybe they would have picked Bivol to beat Beterbiev, but because stylistically it was an easier style matchup for Canelo, a huge hypothetical, which I think is very unlikely, maybe Canelo dared to be great, and he took on who he felt was the best guy at 175, which was, in his opinion, Bivol over Beterbiev. There's a possibility, but I really doubt it. I honestly think they picked Bivol because they viewed him as the easier fight. And I think when you got a fighter's handlers and his team believing that one fighter is better than the other, and he's in your weight class, and he's very likely to fight either of you, and he could choose to fight either of you, and he chooses Bivol over Beterbiev, that kind of makes me think that Beterbiev would beat Dmitry Bivol if they fought. It's such a tough call for me. It's a really difficult prediction. It really annoys me. I love it, but I also hate how tough it is for me to call, because I would just love to have a set opinion on it, but I'm really struggling to fully make a pick. I'm edging out Beterbiev at the moment, but I'm not confident at all, and I could very well switch. I feel Dmitry Bivol has a top 3, maybe even top 2 ring IQ in the entire sport. He is so smart in the ring. He is so fundamentally sound. He is very, very mentally strong as a boxer. His ring IQ is absolutely tremendous and above Artur Beterbiev's in my opinion. But Beterbiev is so explosive. He's so powerful. He's so efficient at pinning guys to the ropes and unloading barrages of punches and perfectly placing those shots. And he's such a good finisher when he has his opponents hurt as well. And he's great at getting the job done. He has a 100% knockout ratio. He's still been able to maintain that. When you look at his career and his resume, his win against Alexander Gvozdyk, which I picked against him and I definitely regret it. I was very close to picking Beterbiev to win that fight, but I always have been a huge fan of Gvozdyk, who is making a comeback, by the way. And man, being the third best guy in the weight class at this point, that's how weak 175 is when you exclude these two fighters. When you look at the Gvozdyk fight, and I at one point thought Gvozdyk was better than Bivol, but honestly I'm not sure about that now. I think Bivol was probably a better fighter than Gvozdyk was, but Gvozdyk did bring other issues that Bivol didn't. I feel Gvozdyk was definitely a bigger puncher than Dmitry Bivol. I felt there were elements to his game that were stronger than Bivol's. However, Bivol I do feel is the more fundamentally sound of the two fighters, and because of that I do think he's a very live dog in this fight against Artur Beterbiev. I mean, this is one of the very few fights that I've ever felt was a 50-50. And honestly, definitely in recent years, but maybe even since I've been watching the sport, there's been a few 50-50 fights here and there. Some people say Crawford-Spence was 50-50, but I always felt Crawford was 60-40. I was always relatively confident in picking Terence Crawford to win that bout. There's a lot of other fights that people have considered 50-50, but this one is such a tough call. This is almost on the level of a coin toss. It's such a difficult fight for me to predict. It's an absolute struggle, and that's why it has to be made. When you look at all the big fights that the fans have wanted to see in the last couple of years, virtually all of them have been made or are going to happen, such as Usyk and Fury. The only one that hasn't been made that we've all wanted to see in the past few years is Beterbiev and Bivol when it comes to undisputed fights. We got Crawford-Spence. We're getting Usyk-Fury. My mind escapes me right now, but I know there's a lot of other ones. Inouye-Fulton, I know that's not as high level when it comes to it wasn't an undisputed matchup, but that's a fight that a lot of fans really want to see, and we got that one. We got a lot of these fights. Charlo Castaño. I mean, there's a lot of other ones, but I just can't think at the top of my head right now. But there was a lot of great fights that all the fans wanted to see, and all of them were getting made at one point. The only one that didn't get made was this one, Bivol and Beterbiev. Let's get Dmitry Bivol versus Artur Beterbiev, 2024. There's no reason they shouldn't fight in the summer, sometime in the summer, maybe later in the summer, so it gives Beterbiev a little. But also, I don't think Beterbiev wants to wait that long either. He is an aging fighter. But he did. I'm not going to say he took punishment in this fight, but it wasn't necessarily an easy fight for Beterbiev. So I do think he deserves some time off. Maybe July would be a good time. Mid-July. Let's get Dmitry Bivol and Artur Beterbiev in mid-July. Unfortunately, with the whole situation going on with the war, I would have thought it would have been great to see these two fight somewhere in Russia. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen. So I would love to see these two guys fight. I mean, I guess it just makes sense for it to be not in Canada, because that would be pretty unfair to Dmitry Bivol. I guess we could have this fight happen. Honestly, let's have some fun and have it in Madison Square Garden. We get all the big fights in Vegas. Let's take a break from Vegas. This isn't really a Vegas type of fight anyway. Dmitry Bivol, Artur Beterbiev for all the belts in Madison Square Garden. Or I could very well see it happening in Saudi Arabia. I would have no issue with it happening in Saudi Arabia. I think it's very likely to happen there, because I think they're probably the only ones who can actually get the job done and make this fight happen. It seems like they're the only ones that have been able to actually get the big fights set, aside from Crawford and Spence. So if this fight isn't in the MSG, Madison Square Garden in New York City, Saudi Arabia is logically where it would happen. I think Saudi Arabian crowds aren't really that entertaining, and the atmosphere isn't super electric or anything, but wherever we can get the fight, let's make it happen for all the belts, all the glory. Winner of this fight is easily super high in the pound list. I'm not going to give them a spot yet, but they would definitely be very high up there. Thanks for watching, guys. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below and your thoughts on Dmitry Bivol's performance. Have a good one, guys. God bless. I'll see you guys later. Peace.